She did not run. She did not cry. She just picked up her passport, her one suitcase, and the secret she did not yet know she was carrying, and she walked out of a marriage that had already buried her. That is where this story begins. But that is not where it ends. 3 years later, Cha Seo-jin flew his pregnant mistress to New York City. He booked the same restaurant where he knew Amarachi would be dining. He requested the window table so she could see them clearly. He had it all planned, the entrance, the timing, the look on her face when she saw what he had moved on to. What he did not plan for was the sound of 2 little boys arguing over the last bread roll. What he did not plan for was Amarachi in a burnt orange dress, completely unbothered, completely radiant, with his own jaw and his own brow sitting on either side of her in the faces of 2 4-year-old boys. What he did not plan for was the way she looked at him when their eyes finally met, not with pain, not with anger, but with the quiet finality of a woman who had already finished grieving him a long time ago. That look broke something in him that no enemy had ever managed to touch. This is the story of what was destroyed, what was hidden, what was exposed, and what had to be rebuilt from nothing. This is not a simple love story. It is the story of a woman who chose her dignity when everyone expected her to fall apart, and the man who spent 3 years learning the cost of that choice. If you are already feeling something in your chest, you are in the right place. Unsubscribe right now, because this channel is where we tell the stories that actually matter. Stories about betrayal, about survival, about love that has been tested and broken and rebuilt. Drop your name in the comments the moment something hits you. This story has 12 major turns. We are just at the beginning. Cha Seo-jin was not a man who made mistakes twice. He ran the Cha family's shipping and pharmaceutical empire across 3 continents with the kind of cold, surgical precision that made grown men straighten their backs when he walked into a room. He had been raised by a mother who believed emotion was a door you left unlocked for your enemies, and by a father who demonstrated that belief by never once telling his son he was proud of him. Ma Seo-jin had taken all of that, all the silence and the cold and the distance, and he had turned it into power. He was brilliant. He was feared. He was, by the time he was 34, completely alone in the middle of everything. And then he walked into a trade negotiation in Seoul that was about to collapse because both sides were lying to each other, and everyone in the room knew it except the 2 people doing the talking. Everyone except Amarachi Okafor. She was the interpreter on the Korean side, hired because she was one of perhaps 40 people in the world who could interpret simultaneously between Korean, Mandarin, and English without pausing. She was 29, Nigerian-born, Igbo-raised, educated at the University of Lagos and then Columbia University in New York. And she had a gift that went beyond language. She did not just translate words. She translated intent. She caught what people were hiding inside the grammar. Halfway through the session, she stopped translating. She turned to the room, ignored the protocol entirely, and said in Korean, "The phrase he just used in that clause does not mean limited liability. In this regional dialect, it means exemption from all future claims. Someone should check the original document before we continue." The room went silent. The clause was wrong. The negotiation was fraudulent on one side. 2 lawyers went pale. Seo-jin, sitting at the head of his delegation, looked at this woman who had just derailed an entire meeting with 6 sentences and felt something he had not felt since he was a child. Genuine surprise. He was captivated, not just by how she looked, though she was the kind of beautiful that made the room rearrange itself around her without her trying. He was captivated by her mind. She was the only person in that building who had been paying attention to the right thing. He found a reason to speak to her after the session. She was professional and direct and slightly amused by him, which he was not used to. he found another reason to speak to her 2 days later, and then again. And then the reasons stopped being reasons and started being excuses, and she let him make them because she found him fascinating and broken in a way she thought she understood. They married quietly 18 months later. Small ceremony, no press, just family and a few trusted staff. His mother, Madame Cha, attended in a silk dress and a smile that did not reach her eyes. That should have been something Amarachi noticed, but she was in love, and love has a way of making a woman believe she can reach the warmth inside a cold man if she just stays patient long enough. For the first year, the marriage was not perfect, but it was real. Seo Jin was not an easy man to be close to. He forgot to say things. He defaulted to silence when he was overwhelmed. He sometimes looked at her across a dinner table, like he was still surprised she was there. But he was present. He listened when she spoke. He noticed the things she liked. When she mentioned once, casually, that she missed jollof rice, she came home 3 days later to find he had quietly arranged for a Lagos-based chef to spend a week in Seoul cooking for her. He did not say, "I love you," easily, but he showed it in small, or deliberate ways that meant more to her than the words would have. Then the second year came, and the silence between them changed texture. 2 years into the marriage and no pregnancy. This was not alarming to Amarachi. She had been to her own doctor. She was healthy. She was not worried. These things took time. She told Seo Jin this. He said he understood. He seemed to. But Seo Jin had a mother, and his mother had a personal assistant. And the personal assistant had been carefully cultivated for 2 years by a woman named Yuna Lim. Yuna was Seo Jin's chief of staff. She was 31, precise, quietly ruthless, and she had wanted this position, not just the job, but everything adjacent to it, since the day she joined the company. She had watched Amarachi arrive and had made a calculation. This marriage had a weakness, and that weakness was the one thing the Cha family placed above love, above loyalty, above everything: legacy. Yuna began her operation with patience, small comments to Madame Cha, carefully worded concerns, nothing obvious, nothing traceable, just seeds, planted in exactly the right soil over exactly the right amount of time. And then one evening, Madame Cha sat across from her son over tea and said, "I have been hearing things from your medical team about the test results. I think you should ask Amarachi directly." Seo Jin frowned. "What test results?" Madame Cha placed a folder on the table. Inside was a medical report, with Amarachi's name at the top, dated 3 months earlier, bearing the logo of a fertility clinic in Seoul. The report indicated, in careful clinical language, a condition that would make natural pregnancy nearly impossible. Seo Jin read it twice. Something moved across his face that was not quite grief and not quite anger, but was somewhere in the narrow space between them. What he did not know, what no one told him, was that the document was forged. Yuna had spent 4 months and a significant amount of her own money arranging it. The doctor whose signature appeared at the bottom had been paid to stay quiet. The clinic's stamp had been replicated on a document that had never been generated by any medical professional who had ever examined Amarachi. Seo Jin did not verify it. He should have. He did not. That was his first unforgivable mistake. He confronted Amarachi that evening after dinner. He placed the document on the kitchen counter between them without saying anything first. Amarachi looked at it. She picked it up and read it. She turned it over. She looked at the date. "I have never been to this clinic," she said. "Your name is on the report." "Seo Jin." Her voice was very steady. "I have never been to this clinic. This is not mine." He looked at her with those unreadable eyes and said, "Then how did they get your records?" "I don't know. But this is not real. I want to verify it." It's already been verified. That sentence, that one sentence, she would think about it for months afterward. Not the content, the delivery. The way he said it, like the decision had already been made before he brought it to her. Like the document was not a question he was asking, but a wall he was building. "Who verified it?" she asked. He did not answer, and she understood in that silence that someone had already been speaking into her husband's ear for longer than this conversation. That was not the face of a man who had just received difficult news. That was the face of a man who had been sitting with difficult news for some time and had only now decided she needed to know about it. But that was not what unsettled her most. What unsettled her most was the way he looked at Yuna the following morning, the briefest glance, the smallest shift, and the way Yuna did not quite look back. Like two people who had already had a conversation in a language they had agreed not to speak in front of Amarachi. She told herself she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. Over the next 3 months, the atmosphere in the house changed in small ways that each seemed minor on their own, but together told a story Amarachi wasn't ready to read. Seo Jin worked later. He answered her questions more carefully, choosing words the way you do when you have been advised to document things. His mother called more often and stopped speaking when Amarachi entered the room. Amarachi threw herself into her work. She took a contract with an international summit series and started spending time in a routine she built around the boys. But the boys were not yet born. That thought did not exist yet. She was just surviving the strange cold season that had settled over her marriage and waiting for it to pass. It did not pass. 2 days before their 3rd anniversary, Seo Jin came home at midday. Amarachi was reading in the living room. He stood in the doorway and said, without sitting down, without preamble, without any of the softness she had spent 2 years building in him, "I'm filing for divorce. My lawyers will contact yours." Amarachi closed her book. She looked at him. She said, "Why?" He said, "You know why." She did not move. She did not raise her voice. Later, she would think it was strange how calm she was. But it was not strange, really. She had been braced for something for 3 months. The specific shape of it was a shock. The fact that something was coming had not been. "The document was forged," she said. "Amarachi, look me in my eyes and tell me you believe that document. Look at me and say it." He looked at her, and for just a moment, one moment, something moved behind his eyes. A crack, a question. But then it closed. "The papers will be ready by Friday," he said. She signed them on Saturday morning. She packed one suitcase. She did not cry in front of him. She walked out of the house she had made a home and got into a car, and only when she was past the gate and the driver's partition was up did she let herself make a sound. She allowed herself 45 minutes. Then she wiped her face, straightened her back, and started thinking about what came next. What came next was this. 2 days later, in the bathroom of a hotel in Incheon, Amarachi Okafor took a pregnancy test that she had bought almost reflexively, the way you do when your body knows something your mind has not caught up to yet. She stared at the result for a very long time, for then she sat on the edge of the bathtub and placed both hands over her stomach and made a decision that would change the next 3 years of her life. He chose a lie over her. He chose silence over the chance to verify. He chose Yuna, whether he admitted it yet or not, over the marriage they had built. These children were not going to grow up as leverage. They were not going to spend their childhoods in the middle of a war between two people who had already decided to stop fighting for each other. They were going to grow up knowing they were chosen by someone who chose them first, before anything else. She boarded the flight to Lagos. She did not tell him. Back in Seoul, Seo Jin was in a meeting when his private phone rang. He let it go to voicemail. He let the next one go, and the one after that. He told himself this was discipline, and he told himself he was doing the right thing. That night, going through a box of things Amarachi had left in the study, things he had told himself he would have delivered, things he had not yet delivered because that would make the finality complete. He found a small white envelope tucked inside a cookbook, a medical envelope, her name at the top, a different clinic, a different date, the real fertility workup, ordered by Amarachi herself 3 months before the divorce from a doctor she had found independently in a different city to rule out any actual concern she had about the lack of pregnancy. Normal results, everything normal, no condition, no issue, no reason. He read it 3 times. He sat in the silence of the study that still smelled faintly of her perfume, and he understood, in one sharp and total moment, exactly what had been done to him and exactly how willingly he had participated in it. His hands were shaking. He noticed them shaking, and found that interesting in the way you find unexpected things. Interesting when you are in the early stages of a shock you have not yet processed. He called Yuna. She answered on the second ring. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Did you know about this?" There was a pause on the other end. Not a long one. But there it was. That pause. That pause told him everything. And then Madame Cha did the thing that broke something in him permanently. He called her after he hung up with Yuna, and she picked up, and he told her what he had found. And there was a silence on her end. And then she said, "I did what was necessary for the family." She did not say sorry. She did not pretend she had not known. She simply offered him the framing she had decided on, necessary, and waited for him to accept it. He was disgusted. He was also trapped, because Yuna was pregnant. The announcement had already been made internally. His mother was already moving forward. The family had an heir in progress, and Seo Jin dismantling everything now would cost the company, cost the merger negotiations that were currently in their most fragile stage, cost everything that the Cha name had been built on. So he buried it. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he would fix it once the timing was right. He poured himself into work. He expanded into 2 new markets. He was brilliant and relentless, and completely, quietly hollowed out. At the end of his first week back in the office after the divorce papers were signed, when he passed Yuna in the hallway, and she looked at him with something that was almost satisfaction, just for a half-second, before she smoothed it back into professionalism. He filed that image in the part of his mind where he kept things that required patience. He would need patience. Meanwhile, in Lagos, Amarachi was telling her mother she was pregnant, watching her mother cry, first from grief about the marriage, then from joy about the babies, then from a complex combination of both, and making peace with the life she was about to build. Her mother said, "You should tell him." Amarachi said, "No." Amarachi, "Mama, no." Her mother looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "You are more stubborn than your father." "I know," Amarachi said. "I learned from you." Her mother laughed despite herself, then pulled her daughter close and held on. The twins were born in Lagos, Kored first, lungs working immediately and loudly, Kelechi 4 minutes later, silent and wide-eyed, and already observing everything. Kored had Amarachi's warmth and her father's jaw. Kelechi had her composure and his father's sharp, quiet attention. They were the most beautiful and most exhausting thing that had ever happened to her, and she loved them in a way that made everything else in her life rearrange itself into before and after. 6 months after the boys were born, Amarachi accepted a position at the United Nations Interpretation Division in New York City. Her salary doubled. Her profile in international work rose fast. She relocated to Harlem, brownstone apartment, good school nearby, enough space for the boys to be loud. And she did not tell Seo Jin where she was. She did not tell anyone in Seoul, but someone in Seoul was not looking. there was a man named Park Hyun-soo who ran the Park Syndicate, the Cha family's oldest and most patient rival. And Park had been watching Amarachi Okafor since she left Seoul. Not because he knew about the pregnancy at first, because she was Cha Seo-jin's ex-wife, and ex-wives of powerful men were interesting people. They knew things. Sometimes they could be useful. By the time his people tracked her to New York and confirmed the existence of the twins, Park had upgraded his interest considerably. 2 boys with Cha blood. Unacknowledged, unprotected, living quietly in Harlem under their mother's name. That was not just interesting. That was leverage. Park began planning. He was patient. He could wait. In New York, now Amarachi's life had a rhythm that she had built carefully and protected fiercely. She woke at 5:30, got the boys ready, dropped them at school, was in her booth at the UN by 8. Korede was in the phase where he narrated everything that happened to him in real time, like a sports commentator providing coverage of his own existence. Kelechi had started asking questions that were genuinely too advanced for a 4-year-old, and looking at Amarachi afterward like he was checking whether she was impressed. She was always impressed. She never fully showed it because she could already tell that one was going to need management. And then there was Emeka. Dr. Emeka Adeyemi was a cardiothoracic surgeon at NYU Langone. He was Igbo, Lagos-born, and calm and deliberate in the way that people who spend their professional lives making decisions under pressure become calm and deliberate in everything else. He had met Amarachi when they were both graduate students in New York, years before Seoul, and they had been close. Close enough that some part of her had always kept the door to that chapter cracked open, even after she walked away to follow a different story. He had never married. He had told her once, in a moment of careful honesty, that the timing had never been right with anyone else, in the way that made him want to rewrite his whole life around it. She had not answered that, but she had not forgotten it either. He was in her life in New York in a way that was never dramatic and never pressured. Sunday dinners that started as occasional and had quietly become almost weekly. Of school pickups when she had late sessions. He taught Korede to tie his shoes on a Tuesday afternoon in October and did not make a big deal of it. And Korede spent the next 3 days tying and untying his shoes in front of anyone who would watch. Kelechi asked Emeka once what it felt like to hold someone's heart in your hands, and Emeka thought about it for a full minute before answering, which was the correct response, and Kelechi decided he approved of this man. Amarachi watched all of this and felt something warm and complicated and unresolved. One evening, after the boys were asleep, Emeka said to her quietly, "I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm just pointing out that you haven't been alone, not really, for 3 years. And that was a choice you made." She looked at him across the kitchen table. She said, "Emeka," he said. "So I know. I'm just saying." She poured him more tea. He accepted it and let the subject close. But it did not fully close. It just waited in the room with them, politely, like a guest who knew it was going to be invited in eventually. What Amarachi did not know, what Emeka did not know, was that a man named Park Hyun-soo had decided the time to act was soon. That his people had been monitoring her building, that they had confirmed her routine, and that he had already made contact with someone inside the Cha circle to deliver a very specific message at a very specific moment. The message was simple: acknowledge the twins publicly, or we will. Park did not intend for Seo-jin to do the right thing. He intended for Seo-jin to panic. He intended for that panic to disrupt the billion-dollar merger the Cha family was finalizing in New York. He intended for the ensuing chaos to fracture the Cha board just long enough for the Park Syndicate to move on the position they had been building toward for 6 years. The message was scheduled to be delivered at the UN Economic Summit in New York, the same summit where, by the strangest and most deliberate coincidence in recent diplomatic history, the lead Korean interpreter had just called in sick, and the replacement assigned by the UN Bureau was the only certified simultaneous interpreter in the city capable of handling both the Korean and the obscure Southern Chinese dialect required for the trade clause session. Amarachi Okafor, Seo Jin's chief of staff, brought him the interpreter manifest on a Thursday morning, and he read the name. He read it again. He set the page down. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his hotel suite because he was already in New York, had arrived 2 days early for preliminary meetings, and looked at the Manhattan skyline for a very long time. His chief of staff said carefully, "Should I request a replacement?" Seo Jin said, "No." And then, after a moment, "Make sure her credentials are processed. I want no delays on her access." His chief of staff left. Seo Jin stayed at the window. He had not spoken Amarachi's name aloud in 8 months. He had not said it to anyone, had not typed it, had operated a careful system of avoidance around the syllables of her name that he was only now realizing had taken a considerable amount of daily effort to maintain. And in 4 days, she would be in the same building. But that was not what unsettled him. What unsettled him was the small thing he had noticed at the bottom of the manifest. Next to her name, under additional credentials, it listed her as representing the Nigerian delegation in a personal capacity for one of the side sessions. There was a name beside it, an emergency contact, a Dr. Emeka Adeyemi. Seo Jin stared at that name for a long moment. Then he turned from the window and went back to his desk and opened his briefing documents and did not think about it. He thought about it for the rest of the day. Across town, in Harlem, Amarachi was ironing a dress for the summit and listening to Korede explain, at considerable length and volume, why it was unfair that Kelechi had gotten the window seat on the school bus when Kelechi had also gotten it. Last Tuesday, which was, or according to Korede's internal justice system, too recent for precedent. Kelechi looked up from his book and said, very calmly, "I got the window seat because I got there first. That is how seats work." Korede turned to Amarachi. "Mama, did you hear that?" "I did," Amarachi said. "Is he right?" "He is." Korede processed this, then said, with the philosophical resignation of a child who has lost an argument cleanly, "Fine, but I'm getting it tomorrow." Kelechi turned a page. "We'll see." Amarachi pressed the iron down and felt, for one ordinary Tuesday evening moment, completely full. She did not know that in 36 hours, everything was about to arrive at once. The past, the present, the threat she had not yet been told about, and the man she had spent 3 years trying to finish grieving. She did not know that Yuna had already found out she was in New York. She did not know what Yuna had already set in motion. But somewhere, in a hotel on the other side of Manhattan, Cha Seo Jin was sitting in the dark of his suite at 11 at night, holding a glass of water he had not drunk, and thinking about a woman in a burnt orange dress he had not yet seen again. And something in him that had been very, very quiet for 3 years was not quiet anymore. Here is Batch B, the final 5,500 words. Plain text, no headings, no file. The morning of the summit, Amarachi was in the interpretation booth by 7:45. She ran her equipment check, adjusted her headset, reviewed the session vocabulary list. She always prepared a custom glossary before high-stakes sessions, pulling the specific technical and legal phrases likely to surface so nothing caught her mid-sentence. It was a habit she had built in Seoul, in a negotiation room where one wrong word had almost cost 2 governments a trade relationship. She did not think about who else would be in the room today. She had decided that 3 days ago, and she intended to hold to it. She lasted until 9:18. That was when the Korean delegation filed in, and she saw him. Cha Seo-jin walked into the conference room in a dark charcoal jacket. No tie, moving with that particular quality of stillness he carried everywhere. The kind of stillness that was not calm, but control. He sat at the center of the delegation table and opened his briefing folder and did not look toward the interpretation booths. She had told herself she was prepared. She was not prepared. Not for the specific way he looked older in a way that suited him. Not for the way her chest did something without asking her permission. Not for the fact that her hands, which had been steady through every difficult session she had ever worked, were now not entirely steady. She pressed them flat against her notes. She put her headset on. She did her job. For 4 hours, she translated with the same precision that had made her name in this field. And for 4 hours, Seo-jin spoke, and she rendered his words into 3 languages without letting a single one of them land in the place inside her that recognized his voice. She was very good at her job. At the lunch break, she was out of the booth and moving toward the side corridor when she heard behind her, in Korean, quiet and direct, "Amarachi." She stopped. She did not turn immediately. She gave herself 2 seconds. Then she turned. He was standing 6 feet away, alone. His chief of staff was visible at the far end of the corridor, doing an extremely convincing impression of someone who was not watching. Seo-jin looked at her. She looked at him. He said, in Korean, "You look well." She said in English, "Thank you." He noted the language shift. She had done it deliberately. Korean was theirs, or had been. English was professional distance. He said, also in English, "I did not arrange this." "I know," she said. "If you had, I wouldn't be here." Brief silence. She watched him process that. Then he said, "I need to tell you something." "Not here," she said. "Not today. We are both working." "After then." Seo-jin. She said his name with a neutrality she had practiced. "Whatever you need to say, it can wait until after the summit. We are professionals. Let us be professional." He held her gaze for a moment. She did not look away. Then he nodded, once, and stepped back. She walked away. Her hands were shaking slightly. She put them in her pockets until they stopped. She did not know that Yoona Lim, back in Seoul, had been on the phone that morning with the restaurant. She did not know that Yoona had found out through the summit guest list that Amarachi was in New York. Yoona still had one contact in the interpretation bureau from her years managing Seo-jin's international schedule, and had called Seo-jin with a sudden, bright suggestion that they fly to New York for a few days. A change of scenery. She was 8 months pregnant, and the doctor had said short travel was still fine, and she had always wanted to see the city. Seo-jin had agreed without enthusiasm, which was how he agreed to most things Yoona suggested these days. What Yoona had then done, quietly, was call the restaurant, the one she knew the Korean delegation used for private dinners, the one she had heard mentioned in the summit logistics, and request the window table for the evening. She wanted Amarachi to see them. She wanted to plant the image of Seo-jin and his pregnant partner in that restaurant, where Amarachi might walk past or be seated nearby. And she wanted Amarachi to feel what Yoona had spent 3 years arranging. Small. Finished. Replaced. What Yoona did not know was that Amarachi had made a reservation at that restaurant 2 days earlier. Her sister Ngozi was visiting from Lagos for the week. Emeka had a table booked at the same place for later the same evening. He planned to join them for dessert. And Amarachi had taken the boys because it was Friday, and on Fridays, she let them stay up and come to dinner and feel like the small, important men they believed themselves to be. She had been there an hour before the Korean delegation arrived. Karede was standing on his chair, explaining to Kalechi why the city looked better from up high, and Kalechi was eating bread and not engaging with this theory, and Ngozi was telling Amarachi something about their mother's neighbor and laughing, and the table was warm and full of noise in the way that good tables are. And then the elevator doors opened. Koreid saw him first. Not because he knew who he was, he did not. But because Koridi noticed everything that entered a room, a quality he had arrived in the world with and would likely carry to his grave. He looked at the man who had stepped off the elevator, and then looked at his mother with the simple observational completeness of a child, and said, "Mama, that man has my nose." The table went quiet. Ngozi looked up. Amarachi did not move. She had always known, in the rational part of her mind, that she had kept carefully maintained, that this moment would come eventually. She had built legal protections around it. She had prepared herself in theory. Theory and practice, it turned out, were not the same. She watched Seo Jin scan the restaurant and find her. She watched the exact moment he processed the twins. No, she watched something happen behind his eyes that she had never seen there before. Not in 2 years of marriage, not in the coldness of the divorce. A kind of fracturing, like ice under sudden weight, quiet and total and irreversible. Yuna was on his arm. She was looking at Amarachi with the expression she had planned. The one that was supposed to communicate arrived and finished with you. But Seo Jin had stopped moving, and Yuna, still performing her entrance, did not notice for 3 full seconds. When she did, she looked at what he was looking at. She looked at the boys. She looked at Seo Jin's face, and the performance she had prepared dropped like a curtain cut from its rail. Ngozi, beside Amarachi, said under her breath in Igbo, "So that is him." Amarachi said, also in Igbo, "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'm observing." "Observe quietly." Kelechi put down his bread. He looked at Seo Jin with his father's exact expression of still, assessing attention. Then he looked at his mother. He did not say anything. He was waiting to understand the room before he spoke, which was exactly what Seo Jin would have done. Yuna moved first. She had recovered enough to remember her plan, or a version of it. She crossed the restaurant to their table with her chin up and her hand on her stomach, and stood at the edge of their table and said, with carefully constructed warmth, "Amarachi, what a coincidence." Amarachi looked up at her. Is it? Those 2 words. The way she said them. Not aggressive, not hurt, just clear. Is it? Like she already knew the answer and was offering Yuna the courtesy of a question she didn't need. Yuna's smile held. Barely. "Tisna, you look wonderful. New York agrees with you." "It does," Amarachi said. Yuna's eyes moved to the boys. Something shifted in her face that she could not fully control. Koreid looked at Yuna's stomach, then at Seo Jin, who had followed Yuna to the table and was now standing there in a silence that was pressing against the entire room. Then Koride said, with the precision of a child who has decided to contribute a fact, "That man has my nose and my forehead." "Mama, who is that man?" The restaurant had gone the particular kind of quiet that happens when everyone pretends not to be listening. Seo Jin looked at his son. His son looked back at him with complete fearlessness. And Seo Jin, Cha Seo Jin, who had sat across from prosecutors and rival family heads and government officials without ever showing anything, had to look away first. Amarachi looked at Yuna and said calmly, "I think this conversation should happen somewhere other than in front of my children. Don't you?" Yuna said, "Are they?" "I'm not answering that here." Amarachi's voice was steady and final as a door closing. "Not in front of them." And then the elevator opened again. Emeka walked in. He was in his post-hospital clothes, dark trousers, simple shirt, the quiet ease of a man who did not need to perform his presence anywhere. He scanned the room, found Amarachi's table, and started walking over. He registered the gathering at the table, the pregnant woman, the unfamiliar man, and his pace did not change, and his expression did not shift. He just walked to the table, put one hand briefly and gently on Amarachi's shoulder, and looked at the boys. "Ready for dessert?" he said. Korede said, "Wise immediately and with full commitment. Yes, I want the chocolate one." Kelechi said, "We haven't finished dinner." Korede said, "I've finished." "You have not finished." Emeka sat down. He looked at Seo-jin once. A single look, the kind that does not need to carry threat because it already carries complete security. Then he looked back at Kelechi. "What did you order?" Seo-jin watched this. He watched Emeka settle into the table like he belonged there. Because he did belong there. Had belonged there for 2 years in ways Seo-jin could not calculate and did not want to. He watched his sons interact with this man with the ease of long familiarity. He watched Amarachi's posture change almost imperceptibly beside him. A slight release, a small safety arriving. Something happened in Seo-jin's chest that he had not experienced before and didn't have a name for. Then Yuna's phone buzzed, loudly, on the table. She grabbed for it, but the screen was already lit, face up, and Seo-jin was standing close enough to read the notification. The name on the screen, Park Hyun-soo. The message preview. Did he see them yet? If he claims them, our leverage disappears. Keep him away from her. Seo-jin went very still. Yuna covered the phone. "It's nothing. Park Hyun-soo," Seo-jin said. His voice was extremely quiet. "Seo-jin, let me explain. How long?" Not a question. A statement waiting for a number. Yuna said nothing. Seo-jin said, "How long have you been in contact with Park Hyun-soo?" The table had gone so still that Kelechi had stopped chewing. Ngozi, who had been watching all of this with the attentiveness of a woman who was going to have a lot to say about it later in private, picked up the bread basket and said to the boys, perfectly cheerfully, "Who wants more bread?" while the grown-ups talk. Both boys raised their hands. Yuna said in a low voice, "I was going to tell you." "You were going to tell me," Seo-jin repeated. The repetition was not agreement. It was documentation. "It was not what you think." "What is it then?" She had no answer that was going to help her here, and she knew it. He could see her calculating and coming up empty, and he watched her do it without mercy and without surprise, because the surprise had already burned through him, and what was left was something much colder and much more focused. He looked at Amarachi. She had been watching him, but not with satisfaction. She was not that kind of person, had never enjoyed other people's disasters, even when they deserved them. She looked at him with something more complicated than satisfaction. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of someone who had spent 3 years knowing there was more underneath what had been done to her and was now watching it surface. She said quietly, "We should all leave. The children are watching." She was right. Kelechi was watching everything with those measuring eyes. Korede had sensed the shift in energy and stopped talking about bread. Seo-jin nodded. He looked at Yuna. "Go back to the hotel." "Seo-jin, go back to the hotel." Yuna left. Seo-jin did not immediately follow. He stood at the edge of the table and looked at his sons, really looked at them. Not the desperate half-second glances of a man in shock, but the deliberate attention of someone trying to learn something important. Korede looked right back at him and said, "Are you leaving too?" Seo-jin said, "Yes, for now." Korede considered this. "Okay, but you have my forehead." Seo-jin said very quietly, "I know." Then he left. Emeka waited until the elevator closed before he said anything. Then he looked at Amarachi and said, "You okay?" She looked at her sister, who looked back at her with the face of a woman holding 17 opinions in reserve. She looked at her boys, who were now arguing about dessert again, with the complete emotional resilience of children whose world is stable enough to bounce off of. She said, I think I need a very large piece of chocolate cake. Korede said, same. Kelechi said, Girl, that is the first thing you and Mama have agreed on all evening. Korede threw a dinner roll at him. The evening was not exactly what Amarachi would have chosen, but she had survived it. She had not flinched, had not broken, had not given Yuna or Seo-jin or any part of her past the satisfaction of seeing her unmade. What she did not know yet, what would arrive in the morning, was that across town, in a suite on the 42nd floor, Cha Seo-jin was on the phone with his lawyer, and his lawyer was telling him about a legal filing that had been submitted to the New York family court 2 months earlier. Amarachi's attorney had filed a paternity notification, not seeking support, not seeking custody, not opening any door. Closing one. Under international law, if the biological father of an identified child is notified of paternity and neither acknowledges nor denies within 60 days, a foreign party could petition for guardianship in certain jurisdictions. Amarachi had discovered the Park surveillance 6 weeks earlier. She had moved before Park could use the boys as leverage. She had legally notified Seo-jin, through official channels, to an address he had not checked, and the 60-day window was now at day 57. Her attorney had sent the filing to protect the boys, not to reach Seo-jin, to close the gap that Park intended to weaponize. Seo-jin read the filing twice. Then he sat back and understood that while he had spent 3 years standing still in his guilt, Amarachi had spent 3 years building a fortress around their children that had already anticipated threats he had not yet identified. She had moved before him. She had been several steps ahead without ever needing to tell him. She had protected his sons from the danger that came with being his sons, and she had done it entirely alone. He stayed up until 3 in the morning. At 7 the following morning, he was sitting in the lobby of her building. He had not slept. He was in the same clothes. He had a coffee he had bought from the place around the corner, and he was sitting in a lobby chair with the specific quality of a man who has decided to wait without knowing how long waiting will take. The doorman had let him in when he explained who he was and had then immediately called upstairs, which was the correct thing to do, and Amarachi had said, "Don't let him up, but don't make him leave either," which was its own kind of answer, and the doorman, who had seen enough of the human condition in 30 years of this work to recognize a complicated situation, had nodded and said nothing more. Emeka arrived at 9 to take the boys to the park. He stepped off the elevator, saw Seo-jin, and stopped. They looked at each other across the lobby. Seo-jin stood up. Emeka said, in Korean, "How long have you been here?" Seo-jin said, also in Korean, and he noted, with something that was not quite pain but was adjacent to it, that Emeka's Korean was fluent and warm, the Korean of someone who had learned it carefully for a specific reason. Since 7. Emeka looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "She is not someone you negotiate with. You should know that about her." "I know," Seo-jin said. "Then why are you sitting in her lobby instead of figuring out what you actually have to offer her?" Seo-jin said nothing. Emeka said, "She doesn't need rescue. She doesn't need money. She doesn't need an apology, though you owe her one. What she needs is for someone to prove, over time, with behavior, that she can trust them. That is not something you can do in a lobby." He paused. "But I suppose sitting here is a start." The elevator opened and Korede came out at speed, stopped when he saw Seo-jin, and stared. Then he turned around and shouted back into the elevator, "Kelechi, the man with the forehead is here." Kelechi appeared at the elevator door, looked at Seo-jin, and looked at Emeka, and then very calmly pressed the door open button and said, "Uncle Emeka, should we go?" Emeka said, "Yes." Korede was still looking at Seo-jin. "Are you going to come with us?" Seo-jin looked at Emeka. Emeka gave him nothing. No permission, No prohibition. Just watched. Seo-jin looked at Karate and said, "Not today, but I would like to. Another time. If you and your brother are okay with that." Khalid considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Kalechi decides these things," he said. "He's better at decisions." Kalechi had already walked out toward the door. He paused without looking back and said, "We'll see how today goes first." Then they were gone, and Seo-jin was alone in the lobby again, with his cold coffee, and the understanding that he had just been assessed and conditionally extended a probationary status by a 4-year-old. He sat back down. At 11, Amarachi came downstairs. She was in a simple white shirt and jeans, no performance, hair pulled back, and she stood in front of him and looked at him with the same eyes that had looked at him in that conference corridor. Professional distance, internal earthquake, neither showing. She said, "You look terrible." "I know." "There is a cafe around the corner. You are not coming upstairs." "I know," he said. She turned and walked out. He followed. The cafe was small and unhurried, the kind of place that makes good coffee and leaves you alone. They sat across from each other at a corner table, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the silence had a weight to it that was not hostile, but was enormous. Then Amarachi said, "Start." He started. He told her everything. The real medical report he had found in the cookbook, what Yuna's pause had told him, what his mother had said after. He told her about burying it because of the merger and the pregnancy and hating himself for burying it. He told her that he had spent 3 years expanding the company and working 18-hour days and achieving everything he had built the company to achieve, and that none of it had ever once produced the feeling that 3 minutes talking to her in a conference corridor had produced. He said this plainly, without performance, just the way a man states a fact he has finally stopped arguing with. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I found out I was pregnant in the airport bathroom in Incheon. 2 days after I signed those papers." He closed his eyes briefly. "I sat on the edge of that bathtub," she said, "and I made a decision. Kind, you had already decided that a piece of paper was more important than looking me in the eyes when I told you it was forged. I was not going to put my children inside that decision." "I know," he said. "Do you?" He looked at her. "I failed you. I had everything I needed to ask one more question, and I chose not to. And every explanation I could give you about why, the pressure, my mother, Yuna, none of them are good enough. There is no good enough." She looked at her coffee. He said carefully, "Who is he to you?" She looked up. "Emeka," he said. "Who is he to you?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He is someone who has been present, consistently, without conditions, and without making me feel like I owe him for it." The sentence landed where she intended it to land. Seo-jin said, "Are you in love with him?" She said, That is not a question you get to ask me." "No," he agreed. "I know. I'm asking anyway." She looked at him for a long time. "I don't know," she said finally, and it was the most honest thing she could have said. And he understood the honesty of it, even though it wasn't the answer he wanted. "I know that he has never once made me feel small. I know that my boys are happy around him. I know that he is good and steady and safe." She paused. "And I know that none of those things are a reason to stay away from something complicated just because it's complicated." He didn't say anything. She said, "What are you asking for, Seo-jin? Be specific." "I am asking," he said, very carefully, "to be allowed to be their father. Not with money. Not with power. Just present. In whatever way you decide is appropriate, under your terms. And," He looked at her. "And I am telling you that I will spend whatever time it takes to prove I understand what I had. I'm not asking you to trust me today. I'm not asking you to feel anything. I am asking for the chance to demonstrate over time that I am not the same man who let a forged document end my marriage without asking a second question." The cafe was quiet around them. Someone's cup clinked. Outside, New York moved at its usual speed. Amarachi said, "I will not be returned to. I am not a place you get to come back to because your other option didn't work. I know. If you enter my children's lives and then leave because it's inconvenient, or because your family has an opinion, that damage doesn't repair. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes. You would need to deal with your family publicly. Not behind closed doors, not a quiet internal reorganization. Publicly. What was done to me needs to be said out loud, not buried in another business decision." He said without hesitation, "Yes." She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "The boys will decide their own relationship with you. I will not engineer it. I will not discourage it. But I will not push it. They are not a gift I am giving you. They are people." "I understand." She stood up. He stood up. She said, "Dinner. Sunday. My apartment. 6 o'clock. You will be on time. You will bring nothing. You will meet my boys as a person, not as an announcement. And Seo Jin." She held his gaze. "If you make Kelechi feel uncertain even once, that's the end. He reads people better than you think." He said, Kelechi told Emeka to see how today went before deciding anything." A small, involuntary smile moved across her face, just for a second. "Yes," she said. "That sounds about right." She left. He stood in the cafe for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called his chief of staff and said, "Set up a family assembly, full board, press access. I have a statement to make." His chief of staff said, "When?" He said, "Tomorrow morning." There was a pause. "Sir, the merger?" "The merger can wait one day." He hung up. The assembly the following morning was not what the CHA board had expected. They had prepared for a business update, a strategic brief, perhaps commentary on the New York summit. Instead, Chaseo Jin stood at the head of the table with 3 cameras present, press access he had arranged himself, and stated, in imprecise and unembellished language, the following: that the medical documentation used to justify his divorce from Amarachi Okafor 3 years prior had been forged. That this forgery had been arranged by Yuna Lim with the knowledge and assistance of a senior family member. That Yuna Lim had simultaneously been operating as an informant for the Park Syndicate, and that he had 2 sons, Korede and Kelechi, whose existence he was formally and publicly acknowledging, whose mother had raised them alone with no support from him, and for whom he took full responsibility going forward. He removed his mother from the board before the session closed. That was the hardest sentence of the morning. He said it without looking at her, and she received it without making a sound, and the silence between them was the size of everything they had both broken. Later that evening, Madame Cha sat in her hotel room and wrote a letter by hand. It took her 4 attempts. The final version was 2 pages in Korean, with an English translation she had produced herself, labored over, imperfect in places, but hers. She gave it to her son's driver with instructions to deliver it to a brownstone in Harlem. Amarachi received it the following morning. She sat at her kitchen table after the boys left for school and read it twice. Then she sat with it for a while. The letter said many things. It did not ask for forgiveness. It did not excuse what had been done. It said, in the plain language of a woman who had run out of strategy and arrived somewhere close to honesty, "I told my son you were not one of us. I spent years believing that was protection. I was wrong. You are more one of us than any choice I made. I am not asking to be released from what I owe. I am asking only to see my grandsons' faces before I am required to answer for it. That is all." Amarachi folded the letter. She thought about what Emeka had said to her, in his kitchen, over tea. You didn't decide wrong the first time. You loved someone fully. That was never wrong. She thought about her boys, Korede, who had already decided the man with the forehead was interesting, and had asked twice since the restaurant when he would see him again. Kelechi, who had said nothing, but had been watching her face carefully for 3 days, in the way he did when he was forming a conclusion. She picked up her phone and called her attorney. "The 60-day window," she said. She would draft the acknowledgement. Seo Jin's name on both birth certificates, full paternity confirmed. And I want a clause about access being contingent on demonstrated consistency, not promises, not intentions. Behavior recorded over time. Her attorney said, "And Madam Cha? The visitation question." Amarachi was quiet for a moment. "One afternoon," she said, "supervised, in a location I choose, and she comes alone." The park syndicate's operation collapsed within a week, without the leverage of unacknowledged paternity, which Seo Jin's public statement had eliminated completely. The position Park had built around the merger disruption fell apart. The Cha merger closed on schedule. 3 of Park Hyun-soo's associates were referred to prosecutors on a charge of corporate espionage. Yuna's connection to Park became part of the same investigation. The pregnancy and the DNA results Seo Jin had quietly requested produced one final revelation. The child was not his. It was Park Hyun-soo's. Yuna had been placed from the beginning. The entire operation had been years in the making. Seo Jin received the DNA results on a Tuesday afternoon. He sat with them for a long time. Then he called his board attorney and instructed him to provide full cooperation to prosecutors on all related matters. He did not protect Yuna. He did not protect anyone who had chosen Park over the people in his life who had deserved better. Sunday arrived. He was at Amarachi's door at 5:58. He had brought nothing per her instruction. He was in a simple dark shirt and dark trousers, no performance. And when she opened the door, he said, "Nah, I'm 2 minutes early. Should I wait in the hall?" She looked at him. "No," she said. "Come in." Korede appeared from around the corner at a dead run, stopped 2 feet from Seo Jin, and looked up at him with the evaluating intensity of someone who has been thinking about this moment for several days. He said, "You really do have my forehead." Seo Jin said, "You have my forehead. I had it first." Korede considered this. "That's a fair point," he said. "I'm Korede. You can come in." Kelechi appeared at the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand, having apparently decided to assist with dinner preparation, which was itself a statement about how he spent time in unfamiliar situations. He looked at Seo Jin. Seo Jin looked back at him. Kelechi said, "Can you cook?" Seo Jin said, "No." Kelechi nodded, like this confirmed something. Then you can set the table. Korede will show you where the plates are." Korede said, "This way," and led him into the kitchen with the authority of a small person who is glad to be useful. Amarachi, from the living room doorway, watched Seo Jin follow her 4-year-old into her kitchen and start asking earnest questions about which plates went where. She felt something shift, somewhere below her ribs. Quiet, warm, complicated and earned. She went back to the stove. The dinner was loud and imperfect and full of the kind of interruptions and negotiations and small disasters that dinners with 4-year-old twins involve. Korede knocked over his water glass. Kelechi explained, at length, a theory he had developed about why the moon looked bigger near buildings. Seo Jin listened with the full focused attention he usually gave business briefings, and Kelechi, who was very good at noticing when he was being given real attention versus performed attention, looked at him afterward with a very slight recalibration of his expression. After the boys were in bed, Amarachi and Seo-jin stood in her kitchen. She was washing dishes. He picked up a dish towel without asking and started drying them. They worked in silence. Then she said, "Kurita asked me this morning if you were going to be his appa." Seo-jin was quiet. "I told him," she continued, "that was something that would happen over time, not all at once." "What did he say?" "He said, that's what Kalechi always says about learning things." And then he went and found his shoes. Seo-jin almost smiled. It wasn't quite there. It was the edge of it, the shape of what a smile would be if it had time and permission to arrive. "He's going to be exhausting," he said. "He already is," Amarachi said. "He's also going to be extraordinary." They finished the dishes. She dried her hands. He folded the towel and set it on the counter. He said, "Thank you. For tonight." She nodded. He said, "I know I don't get to ask for things yet. I know this is the beginning of something that will take a long time and should take a long time. I just want to say," he stopped, started again. "You were right about the forged document. You stood in that kitchen and told me it was not real, and I made a choice not to believe you. There is no version of that where I was the person you deserved. I know that." She looked at him. "I know you know," she said. "So that's why you're standing in my kitchen right now instead of in the hallway." He held her gaze. "When you're ready." "Don't finish that," she said. Not harshly, just clearly. "Let it not be a sentence yet. Let it just be what's happening." He nodded. She walked him to the door. He put on his jacket. He paused in the doorway. "Kalechi shook my hand when I said goodnight," he said. "I saw. He has your handshake." She almost laughed. It moved across her face, and she let it. And he watched it like a man watching something he had not been sure he would ever see again. He left. She closed the door and stood in her hallway in the quiet of her apartment, listening to the sounds of her boys asleep, and felt the full weight of everything she had survived to be standing in this particular hallway, in this particular moment. And she had not taken him back. She had not closed the door. She had done the harder thing. She had left it open just enough for what was real to walk through, on terms she had set, in time she controlled. Emika called that evening. She told him how dinner had gone. He listened. When she finished, he said, "How do you feel?" She thought about it honestly. "Like I'm at the beginning of something. I don't know what yet." He said, "That's the right answer." A pause. "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "I'm going to step back," he said. "Not because I gave up. I want to be clear about that. But because I've watched you for 2 years, hold your breath waiting to know what you wanted. And I think tonight, you started to breathe again." He paused. "I love you enough to not want to be in the way of that." She pressed the phone to her ear. "So, Emika, I know. You are one of the best people I have ever known in my life. I know that too," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. Real, warm, the smile of a man at peace with a hard decision. "The boys are allowed to still call me Uncle Emeka." "They would never stop," she said. "You know Kurita would track you down." He laughed. "Yes, he would." After she hung up, she sat in her living room for a while. She thought about the Amarachi who had signed those divorce papers in Seoul with her back straight and her face composed. She thought about the bathroom in Incheon Airport, the 2 lines, the decision made on the edge of a bathtub. She thought about 3 years of Sunday mornings and school runs and UN booths and building, building, building. Something no one could take. She had not survived in spite of loving him, and she had survived because she had loved herself first. That was the lesson. Not the love story, not the reconciliation, not the man finally arriving at her door. The lesson was the version of her that had made a choice in an airport bathroom and kept every promise she had made to herself since. The narrator said it plainly. Some women wait to be claimed. Amarachi Okafor chose herself so completely that when the truth finally surfaced, there was nothing left to rescue, because she had already done it. What Seo Jin gets now, if he earns it, is not a second chance with a broken woman. It is the chance to know a whole one. And that is not given. That is granted. By her, on her terms, in her time. If this story made you feel something real, if you have ever signed your name on something that cost you, ever walked out of something that should have chosen you, ever rebuilt in silence while the world didn't notice, this channel was built for you. Subscribe right now, not for the algorithm, because these are the stories that deserve to be heard by people who understand what they mean. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have told him? Or would you have done exactly what Amarachi did? I want to hear from you. Your answer matters here. The story of the Nigerian housekeeper who cleaned a Korean CEO's penthouse for 2 years and learned every secret in it, and then walked into his boardroom as the silent majority shareholder who had been buying his company from underneath him since year 1. That story is coming next week. Subscribe and hit the bell. We are not done here. We are just getting started.